What's up, Internet? I thought I would try to get this update video out today for the Freezing Pulse Totem build guide update for 3.9. We've only got one day left before the league starts, and I think I've made all the changes I know that I can make for it. Now, if you're pretty new and you don't know what this is Path of Building. This is a program a lot of us use to create and evaluate our builds for this game. I'll put a link in the description to where you can grab this program. And if you never used it, it's pretty simple. Once you've got it installed and opened, what you'll do is you can grab the pastebin link. I'll put that in the description too. Or you can go to the build, the guide thread, go to the skill tree section, go to this Path of Building import and copy this link right here. And what you'll do is come back into Path of Building, click New up here. Once you're on a new page, up here at the top left, you'll click Import, Export, Build. Down here in the Build Sharing section, you've got an Import from Pastebin button. Click that, Control V, import that guy. It'll say code is valid, and then you click this little import button right here. So this is going to import the 3.9 version of the build that I've created for the guide. And down here, there's some drop downs that'll show you, what your suggested skill tree should look like at different breakpoints. This is the normal labyrinth. This happens around level 33, and then cruel labyrinth at around 55, merciless, uber, and then finally, level 95 is typically where a lot of people stop. So everything you need to know about not just the passive tree, but some example loadouts and all of your skill gems are in here. Now, this is I think the third update to the build that I've done, and 3.9 has got a lot of changes coming to pretty much every aspect of the build except this one. Thankfully, there's no passive tree changes for 3.9. All the passive tree changes are happening down here. It's mostly about melee and bows and the new ballista totem stuff. None of that affects us. There's absolutely no changes going on here in the passive skill tree. So, nothing to worry about there. One of the areas that's going to be changing a lot, however, is the skills. Because one of the big features of 3.9 is this new class of support gems called Awakened Support Gems. And if we go to the gem info page that they put up yesterday, you can see all 35 of the Awakened support gems that are going to come out in this patch. And they're basically just sort of a new tier of support gem above the existing ones. So only 35 support gems are getting upgraded this patch. And these gems are going to be presumably fairly rare. They only drop in the sort of the endgame Atlas content from the new Conquerors bosses. And they represent pretty decent power spikes for us. For Freezing Pulse in particular, there are 3 Awakened support gems that will upgrade ones we're already using. There's an Awakened Controlled Destruction, an Awakened Cold Penetration, and an Awakened Added Cold Damage. So the most important one of these 3 is actually Added Cold Damage, because right now, like in 3.8, Added Cold Damage is our worst damage support. It's only worth about 20% more damage. It's okay, but as a support gem goes, 20% is really not that amazing. If we take a look at the Awakened version, though, at level 5, which is actually the max, all of these, I think, have a max level of 5. I don't think I saw any of them that were different. But it does take a crap load of experience to level these to 5. It'll probably be similar to leveling an Empower to level 3, I think. But anyway, Awakened Added Cold doesn't just increase the amount of flat cold that it gets, but at max level it also grants +1 the level of supported cold skills. So if we look at the current Added Cold, it does 169 to 254, and the Awakened version does 227 to 341. Which is basically like 3 more levels of Added Cold. But it also grants +1 to Freezing Pulse. So as you can see, we go from about 765 to 865, which is about 35 or 36% more damage, whereas this is like normally only 20. So this gem gains a ton of value. Both Controlled Destruction and Cold Penetration are also pretty good bonuses. Controlled Destruction is already our second best support gem at 37.6 in this setup, and it gains about 10% more damage because Awakened Controlled Destruction, if we find that right here, gains another 5% more spell damage, but it also gains 10% increased cast speed. And cast speed is a really nice multiplier for us because we're a build that is just drowning in increased damage, right? If you look at just from the skill tree and our uniques, Self-Flagellation grants a massive amount of increased damage. On average, we'll put about 8 curses on ourselves from Soul Mantle, and that's 160% increased damage right there. We get nodes like Prodigal Perfection. This is another 40% increased. Clear Mind is a 60% increased. Transfiguration of Mind winds up being like a 60 to 70% increased, and that's before all of the normal kinds of increased damage. So more increased damage tends to have a lot lower value for us than it does for a lot of other builds, just because we've already stacked so much of it. So it makes stats like cast speed and crit multi and crit strike chance noticeably more valuable to us. So when this gets an additional 10% cast speed, the value of this gem goes up quite a bit and overtakes Hypothermia by quite a lot. It just, the difference between Controlled Destruction and Awakened Cold Destruction is not as much as the difference between Added Cold and Awakened Added Cold. So that makes this sort of your first priority of Awakened gem, and then you'd want to get a Controlled Destruction, and then finally an Awakened Cold Penetration, because Awakened Cold Penetration only goes up by 5% cold pen, and then it gets another 10% increased cold damage. And like I just mentioned, the value of increased damage of any source is kind of low for us. They seem to be trying to pull a little bit of penetration out of the game. There were a lot of nerfs to different elemental penetration sources in the patch notes, so I kind of understand why cold penetration didn't go up very much. One thing this does mean is that if you do get all 3 of those Awakened support gems into your Freezing Pulse link, the value of adding an Empower 4, which is something we used to do by trading out our added cold damage, right? Because this was such a bad gem. We're at like 763 in this setup. If we went to an Empower 4, this used to be a pretty good value, right? This is like 30%. So it's a nice 10% bump over added cold. What happens though is that if you have Awakened Cold here, and then Awakened Controlled Destruction, and Awakened Cold Pen, the weakest gem becomes Increased Critical Strikes. But all of the increased damage we got from the other gems starts to pull up the value of Increased Critical Strikes too. And if you look at it right now, like if we just try to trade out Increased Crit Strikes for Empower 4, we're currently at 763. And Empower 4 would be 773 in this setup, which is a pathetic increase. It's like just over 1%. And this Empower 4 gem is really expensive. Multiple exalts. And it's definitely a pain in the ass to make yourself. You basically never want to pay a bunch of exalts for like a 1% increase. In a high, like the really, really high budget setup, you might get a little bit more value, actually, but it could still be as low as 2 to 3%. And it basically means that you're just never gonna reasonably want an Empower anymore until it's like the fucking last thing you ever do. Like if you've literally bought every other upgrade in the world, maybe you'll go into an Empower now. But for the most part, I think Empower is just kind of dead for this build, and you're gonna want to get the Awakened gems instead. There is one other Awakened gem that's really important here that I wasn't expecting, and it's this Awakened Curse on Hit support. It looks pretty unassuming until you get to that last line that says supported skills can apply an additional curse, which kind of came out of left field for me. and makes this gem really, really desirable. Unfortunately, I think most builds are going to feel that way. So I expect this to be probably the most expensive awakened gem on this whole list. And hopefully not the rarest, but I don't know. I'm not holding my breath. But let's say we can get it. I'm assuming that this, if you just buy this in a trade league, it's going to be insanely expensive. Maybe not quite as much in that Zeri's reflection, but maybe close to it, unfortunately. But let's say we do get it. Maybe we get lucky and find it. How do we fit it into the build? I think the most reasonable thing to do is to just drop our self-cast Frostbite setup and replace this with a Freezing Pulse. And we'll just do a self-cast Freezing Pulse, and then you would link Awaken Curse on hit with both Frostbite and Projectile Weakness. And so this Awaken Curse on hit would give you the ability to run both curses in a pretty clean way compared to doing something like, you know, Anointing Whispers of Doom, which costs a shitload too, but also blocks you from running something like Flash Freeze. This is a pretty much a straight upgrade. And Freezing Pulse makes a pretty good candidate for what we want to use for Curse on hit, because we're already running 2 First Snow Jewels. So even our self-cast Freezing Pulse would get 5 projectiles. And we have a shitload of projectile speed because we're stacking it for our totems anyway. And so we would just be our little 5th totem, except we'd be applying curses instead of doing damage. The problem when you do that is this Arcane Surge. Because right now, one of the reasons that we run self-cast Curse is because it allows us to run a really high-level Arcane Surge and have a pretty convenient method of applying it. Unfortunately, you would have to move this gem, and your options to where you move it to are all really low mana cost options, and so you're going to lose about 6.5% total DPS, dropping this Arcane Surge probably down to like rank 8 or something. But you have 2 options of where to move it to. One would be to move it into your Frostbomb setup and replace Increased Area of Effect with Arcane Surge rank 8. This will hurt your area coverage on Frostbomb a little bit, but you can make some of that back by getting the Awakened Spell Cascade. I'm not sure how expensive this one's going to wind up being, but this Awakened Spell Cascade basically adds 2 more. Like, I don't know if you don't know what Spell Cascade does in the first place. When you target an area with an area attack like Frostbomb, where you can click and drop it where you want, Spell Cascade makes it also... and somebody following my stream again while I'm recording. This drops your area of effect both in front and behind of where you targeted. Well, the Awakened version also puts it to the left and to the right of where you targeted in kind of a plus shape. So you really wouldn't need increased area of effect at that point. You'll get a ton of coverage out of Awakened Spell Cascade. And realistically, just regular Spell Cascade without increased area of effect is probably good enough for what you're going to be using Frostbomb for. The downside of linking Arcane Surge here is that while you're clearing maps and stuff, you're typically not hitting Frostbomb very often. So if you put Arcane Surge here, you're going to be compelled to hit it once like every 7 seconds, which is quite a bit more than you're typically going to hit it during normal map clearing. The alternative is to attach it to your Flame Dash. And instead of doing, I have faster casting and portal here, so I don't have to carry portal scrolls. You would drop faster casting for the increased duration, and then link this to a rank 8 Arcane Surge. And if you do that, it actually winds up being like just barely enough for rank 8. If we check it here, like increased duration, Arcane Surge. I think this is 41 mana. And I'm pretty sure if you link increased duration to Flame Dash, you wind up at exactly 41 mana. So you can just barely fit a rank 8 in here. But this would be a lot more convenient for map clearing. You're definitely going to be Flame Dashing at least once every like 7 seconds or so during map clear. Where it's a little bit less convenient. Really, another person? I gotta turn that off the next time I record a video, Jesus Christ. The part where it's not as convenient is during boss fights, because there's going to be times during, especially the really hard endgame boss fights, where you don't necessarily want to move. The boss will be doing something in some area, you know, like you can think of Uber Elder, and the Shaper is beaming across an angle, and so you're kind of just pinned into some area for like the next 3 or 4 seconds because you don't want to cross across the Shaper beam. And if your Arcane Surge is falling off, you feel that pressure of like, well, do I flame dash in some direction to get it back, or do I just let it drop and wait? It's not as big a deal, really, I think, but it's a consideration. And plus, you have to give up your Portal Gem. I fucking love my Portal Gem. So I think in the end, though, I'd probably attach it to Flame Dash over Frost Bomb and just keep the increased area. I would say, though, do try to get an Awakened Spell Cascade, unless these are really expensive. This will be a nice gem to have attached to our Frost Bomb. I think that's about all it's going to change on the skills. We're going to get 3 Awakened Gems that are going to push Empower out of our upgrade range, pretty much. And then we have an Awakened Curse on Hit that we're going to really want to eventually transition into to replace our Self-Cast Curse, and then an Awakened Spell Cascade. Now, where a lot of changes are going to happen that I don't have a lot of answers for yet are here in the items. Now, the nice thing is that the unique side of this is not changing, that I know of. You know, nothing they've revealed is going to change our item plans on the unique side of things. However, all of these rare slots are kind of up in the air right now. So let's talk about what we do know. We do know that multi-mod got nerfed. Okay, so previously, if you put multi-mod that can have multiple crafted modifiers onto anything, you could then craft as many modifiers as you could fit on the item. You know, you could have 3 prefixes, 3 suffixes, and then the multiple crafted modifiers takes up 1 suffix. Well, now in 3.9, that affix is being changed to say can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, and it's still a crafted suffix, so you only get 2 more modifiers, which means if you are going to multi-mod, you're going to need a base that has at least 3 really good affixes on it already, which means making a decent weapon, especially in the mid-game range, is going to be harder, and you're going to have to probably ID more rares, keep a closer eye on the trade market, and probably use a lot more essences, probably be doing some more fossil crafting. Ultimately, it's just going to be harder to find decent weapons than it was in 3.8. In the POB here, I have an example of what a multi-mod would probably, like a pretty good one would look like in 3.9. We landed like +1 cold spells, and those are tier 3 cast speed and spell damage affixes. So you could go all the way up to like 109 spell damage and like something like 30% cast speed on tier 1 rolls. And then, you know, we crafted flat cold and global crit. You could definitely get much stronger weapons than this, but this would be a totally good weapon to have at around the level 95 when you're kind of cleaning up in the end game area. You'll notice here in the POB too that I'm dual wielding this wand, because one of the other things that we do know is that the Shaper and the Elder are no longer part of the sort of main storyline. Conquerors of the Atlas is moving the storyline forward to introduce these new Conquerors, who are the people, the exiles, who actually killed the Shaper and the Elder in the storyline. So the Shaper and the Elder are no longer going to appear on the Atlas, which means Shaper influence maps are no longer going to be a regular thing, meaning there's going to be a lot less Shaper weapons. Unfortunately, we were often using a Shaper shield like this because it had +1 to maximum number of summoned totems, allowing us to go from 4 totems to 5. It's going to be possible to get a shield like this again, because Shaper Scarabs from Betrayal are going to allow you to put Shaper influence on a map. And a lot of people are going to be running those just to try and get these Shaper bases and sell them. And we only need an item level 70 Shaper shield to be able to roll that totem affix. So I do expect to see these, getting into the trade market pretty early as people try to farm up shaper bases. It definitely does mean that it's going to be harder to get though, especially in the early days. That first week is going to be slow pickings, I think, for shaper bases. The nice thing is that, for the most part, and this was true in 3.8 too, it just didn't make as much sense to do this, you can just dual wield your weapon. You just get another wand, or, get another scepter if you're using scepters. You do have to bear that in mind. Wands cannot be dual wielded with anything but other wands. So if you get a scepter in your main hand, you're going to need another scepter. If you put a wand in your main hand, you do need to get another wand. But there's actually nothing wrong really with just dual wielding and just giving up the +1 totem. If we fix our, where's our frostbite? I think we were running at level 18. Okay. So if we look at dual wielding the wands, we're at about 763,000 DPS per totem, and we have 4 totems, which would give us just barely over 3 million shaper DPS. Whereas if we run the shield, we're at 579 over 5 totems, which I think actually leaves us just shy of 3 million, if I'm not mistaken. Just trying to do early morning mental math here. But as you can see here, even in a single target context, it might not be a terrible thing to just dual wield. What it'll cost you is defenses, right? It's going to be a lot more reasonable to get like plus life, plus resists, things like that on a shield. Whereas if you run another weapon, you're almost certainly going to wind up purely offensive stats. I think you can usually afford to do this, right? We still have pretty good effective HP with 2 wands in this setup. And having 4 totems instead of 5 when they're this much stronger is actually going to result in sort of a clear speed increase in your mapping, right? Because when you're mapping, you're not like piling all 5 of your totems in the same place. You're usually dropping 2, moving on, dropping 2, and moving on. And you want those 2 totems that you do drop to be, much more powerful. So I have a feeling that I'll probably just dual wield all the way up until I get Net Series Reflection in 3.9. Now some of this, and a lot of these other slots that we're going to talk about, there's a lot of unknown factor in the fact that there are 4 new influence types, right? If we look at the teaser page, we have these 4 Conqueror influence types, and we really don't know, nothing about them in patch notes tells us like what kind of affixes we can roll other than these few teasers we have. And the teasers show some pretty powerful affixes, right? These boots have Tailwind on crit, which is nuts. This has +1 maximum power charges, which is not that nuts. But this amulet, for example, this amulet has +1 to level of all cold skills and +1 to level of all dexterity skills. There's no reason that dexterity could not have been intelligence, which would have made this a +2 freezing pulse amulet, which is just nuts, So when we think about like, well, what kind of rare weapon do we really want? The answer is, I can't tell you. I don't know until we get in there and see what kind of affixes we have on influence weapons. And that's going to be true for pretty much all of these items we look at, right? Is there going to be a reason to have an influence helmet? I don't know. I do know that we'll probably want to be fossil crafting this still to get the -9 cold res aura, which is frigid fossils. We lose a little bit of life here because we can no longer roll the 3% life from fossils. They just removed that. But we're still going to want that 9% cold res aura. Will we want an influence helmet? I don't know. I think for gloves, it's going to be hard for influenced, like Crusaders or Redeemers or whatever, to match Shaper gloves when we can get a pairing like faster casting and slower projectiles. And that's going to be true. You probably won't want slower proj anymore in the case where if you do get an Awakened Curse on hit and you wind up having to run it in these gloves, well, I guess you could probably move those gems around and run them in your helmet or something. but you're not going to want slower projectiles linked to your self-cast Freezing Pulse if you wind up with an Awakened Curse on hit. But otherwise, you're going to want the faster casting and the increased cast speed. Those are really powerful affixes because the faster casting one from Shaper comes with that flat global cast speed roll. So, I mean, it could be the case where one of the new influences comes out swinging and is better than this, but of all of our rare slots, I have a feeling Gloves will be the one that we really want to be Shaper still. Boots are a slot, again, that has a lot of potential for us to get a lot of power. Typically, we run this as a really defensive piece. I'm not really concerned about influence on it currently. We do still want the damage penetrates 10% of resistances if you haven't killed recently. And especially if we're going to wind up doing even more self-casting, if we get an Awakened Curse on hit, we definitely want the 120% increased crit chance enchant a lot less, because we'll have more opportunity to crit ourselves with a self-cast Freezing Pulse. Even if it doesn't do any damage, it still has a chance to crit for 0, which would wipe out the boot enchant for 4 seconds. So we really want the damage penetrates 10% of resistance if you haven't killed recently. Our totems are not us, so when they kill things, it doesn't count for this. So we just have this up forever. But who knows? We could wind up, wanting influence here. Amulet is probably the one that I'm the most certain we are going to want some kind of influence. Like when they show me an item like this, it's almost impossible that we are not going to want one of these influenced amulets. So I would say, of all of our rare slots, be the most wary of investing a lot of currency into an amulet early until we understand the affixes better and we know what's on the influence pools. Just try to find something decent and rare. Our priorities haven't changed much outside of the new, unknown influence stuff. We still want global crit multi here. We still would like to have maybe a nice life roll and cast speed. Those are usually our 3 priorities. Then you can use it to shore up like resists or get some more increased damage. I will say you definitely still want a dex base. Dexterity is going to be a little bit more important at 3.9, even if you're not into the Adzeres Reflection setup, which requires like 130 dex. The max rank added cold and cold pen are both 126 dex. So we would want a little bit more dex in the build. You definitely want to make sure you have a dexterity base for your amulet, which can be like a turquoise. It can be a jade. And there's one other base I can't remember off the top of my head. But just try to make sure you get a dexterity implicit here. Kigzar rings, nothing's changing here. The only thing to mention, I would say, is that in 3.9 in the Metamorph League, they're adding this currency type thing called catalysts. And they're going to be how we add quality to jewelry slots finally. Well, quality on jewelry has an impact on the affixes on the whole item. So they're separated out by type. So like you can get a catalyst that only improves life and mana modifiers. And if you applied it to a ring, it still caps at 20%. It would improve all of the life and mana affixes on the ring by 20%. Well, unfortunately, Kigzar looks like it has no good lane to apply any kind of catalyst. Like, you wouldn't really want to waste it on lightning resistance. You're going to be wearing 2 of these, you're going to have a shitload of lightning resistance anyway. You're going to be overcapped on lightning, if anything. And you also really, even if there is a catalyst that improves that 40% reduced effective curses on you, if you had 20% quality on both rings, it would only add up to 96% reduced effective curses, leaving you with 4% of, 10 curses that might stack up on you from Soul Mantle. Still a problem, right? You don't want to have 4% of anything, of 10 stack of curses. So you would still need Sanctum of Thought, defeating the whole point of putting the fucking catalyst on the ring in the first place. The only one that might be any good is if the life and mana one applies to life and mana regen. You get a little bit of value out of that. But it'd probably be better to just save your catalyst until you're into an Adzeres Reflection setup, or sell your catalyst on to get currency for some other kind of upgrade. I think our amulet and our belt slot will be the better targets for your Metamorph catalysts. I would, you know, because the amulet tends to be such a more offensive slot, you're probably going to want to put like a catalyst that increases critical multipliers or caster multipliers here. And then on your belt, you'll probably want catalysts that improve life or mana or resists, since this is usually a pretty defensive slot. And then, yeah, I mean, for the belt too, this is sort of our last rare slot, and this will be another opportunity maybe for us to get some kind of good caster affixes out of an influence belt. We'll have to see. The rest of the build, though, item-wise, isn't changing. You know, none of the uniques need to change. I guess you could say you could probably replace a clear mine with like a militant faith timeless jewel in terms of stats, but it's a pretty minor point. And something I'll add to the guide a little bit later if I'm satisfied with the results of all that. Yeah, I think that's about all I want to go over for this update. I feel like the gem situation is pretty understood. There's so much that we have to learn about the item pools, though, that I feel like I can't make great recommendations other than you'll probably want to be dual wielding unless you get lucky or you find a really cheap shaper base on the trade market when nobody's looking. Otherwise, we just have a lot to learn about the new influence pools that we just have to wait until the league starts to find out how these rare slots are going to change. Overall, though, I would say that the build will probably be better in 3.9 than it was in 3.8, right? Just getting an Awaken added cold damage and buffing up our worst support gem, the opportunity to get Awaken Curse on hit and introduce dual curse in a much cleaner way than prior to 3.8, and then whatever we happen to gain out of the new influence pools. Also, the freeze and chill calculation is changing to be even more generous to us. So we're going to apply stronger chills to bosses and freeze even more frequently than we do right now. Yeah, I think it's going to be just in better shape overall than it was in 3.8. And plus, in 3.9 we're getting that new Freezing Pulse spell graphic that they showed off at Exile Con during the PoE 2 demo. That's being added in 3.9. Like, what else could you ask for, really? I'm pretty happy with the patch overall. I think we're getting out in pretty good shape compared to a lot of builds that I think were, you know, probably hurt by the multi-mod change and all the Elder and Shaper crafting changes. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for Friday. I'm going to be streaming a shitload of Path of Exile, so I'll leave a link to my Twitch channel in the description if you want to stop by on Friday. And keep your eyes on the forum thread. I'll put a link to that there too, because that's where most of my build updates will hit first. If you want to find out all the details on what new items we find for the build. I'll also be doing, if you watch the YouTube channel, I will probably upload a video every day like I did during Blight for my League Start progress through Metamorph and Conquerors of the Atlas. And it'll probably go a lot longer this league because we have a lot more to figure out and some new bosses to fight and stuff. So yeah, I'm pretty excited. If you have any questions, you know, drop them in the comments or find me in the forum thread or on my Twitch channel on Friday. I guess I'll see you guys on Friday. Peace.